face of your new police state.
Welcome to the second part of our Frans Cronje, the CEO of the IRR in South Africa interview. In the first part, he answers several questions and we had a discussion about what is the true nature of the situation in South Africa. We will continue that interview in this video. Before I do, I just want to let everyone know that one of the things that I think is most interesting and applicable is that South Africa stands for us to be a potential warning as a first world or second world nation goes full communist in what it could look like, especially when you add a racial element to it. So for us here in America, I think South Africa is a worthy study. So here's our second part of our Charles Carroll Society and Frans Cronje interview. So thank you very much. One of the specific, that's an excellent history lesson for Western audiences, especially for all audiences. So one of the specific things that are questioned are, is there truly a horrific element of murders going on in South Africa, and specifically, obviously, farm murders? I guess in America we have a lot of rural people. I live in the rural places, and so I don't know if that resonates a little bit more in America, where people, they have space, they have, I mean, you've been here, so even in the suburbs where, people have their land, I think this, home invasion type theory may resonate, may strike a nerve here in America. But some people say, oh, no, it's just crime is normal. Some people say, no, they use sometimes terms that some people may not like. But is there an issue with this? Is this violence happening and increasing? What can you tell us about that?
South Africa suffers from extraordinarily high levels of serious and violent crime. The murder rate across the country at present is approximately 34 people being murdered out of every 100,000 people in the country. And the comparative figure for the United States at the moment, I think, is around 4 per 100,000. So you can say the intensity is 8 times higher, and the US figure is seen as relatively high by comparative standards. So the first point to make is that all South Africans, regardless of socioeconomic status or background or race or ethnicity, are exposed to extraordinarily high levels of violent crime. And that's sometimes lost in this debate. Within that, there are subsections of crime that deserve to be studied separately. And one of those is attacks on farms and farmers. The best estimates put commercial farm murder rates at around 50 per 100,000. So somewhat higher than the national average, which is already exceptionally high by international standards. The controversial point is, are these farm murders racially inspired? And I think if you look for neat linear lines of cause and effect, that did a politician make an inflammatory statement, and did someone on hearing that statement go out and murder a white commercial farmer, you're likely to find very little evidence of that. But there's a more insidious thing on the go, that when you're a society that suffers from the extremely high levels of violent crime that we do, with easy access to weapons, including assault weapons, in what is already a heightened climate of populist incitement, and you then have political leaders that go about making statements such as that white South Africans stole the land, that they don't deserve to have it, that white farmers are abusive and are the reasons for poverty or unemployment or desperation in the society, then what you're getting is an environment where the political leadership and the government are creating a climate in which attacks on those white farmers are more likely rather than less likely. And you might therefore not be able to find direct linear lines of cause and effect. But if you're a society in which its leadership and its government creates a climate in which a section of that society becomes more vulnerable to violent crime, then I think you're dealing with essentially the same crisis and a serious moral failure on the part of that government. And in as far as that failure is concerned, I think it is fair to say that there is a measure of political incitement behind the killings of white farmers on South African farms. Reality is, of course, incredibly complex. And South Africa is not a society in which all farmers are white. There are an increasing number, but still minority, of black commercial farmers. And the lesson to be learned is this, that if you create a climate in which farmers are murdered, it's not going to be only the whites that suffer. And increasingly here and there, we begin to find the evidence in the case studies of where black commercial farmers find themselves caught up in exactly the same violence. A particularly horrific case that we have direct knowledge and experience of is of a black commercial farmer in South Africa's Free State province who's attacked in exactly the same manner as white farmers are attacked. He is shot and killed during the attack. His wife is raped. She's shot in the head and dies a week later. Now, that's a black commercial farmer. And part of the reason why that chap is being attacked is because a climate of opinion is created in which attacks on commercial farmers is tolerated by political leadership that incites those attacks to an extent and certainly fails to take sufficient action to secure the safety and security of farming communities. It is pointless to get into an argument, though, about who's more likely to be the victims of serious or violent crime in South Africa when you're a society that demonstrates such extraordinarily high levels of violence. Rather than dividing South Africans into what becomes this silly debate about are you more likely to be murdered than I am, the experience of violent crime is probably the one experience that South Africans across, and the fear thereof, is the one experience that South Africans of different race and class groups have in common with each other, perhaps more than anything else. And if we can get past the political divisiveness and the rhetoric and the incitement, the collective stand against violence in our society might be something that can do as much to unite that society as almost any other strategy or approach to unity that anyone could propose.
Yeah, that's a good point. I've told my audience, socialism leads to destruction of almost everything, rights, property, wealth. And if you look at how hardcore communists often take power, it's the landowners that usually are annihilated, the property owners that are annihilated in almost every instance. And it doesn't matter. Well, the race of the landowner soon becomes secondary. The Russians kill the Ukrainians, the Chinese kill themselves. I mean, the Venezuelans put, landowners in Venezuela out of business. If you look at almost every one of them, it seems that, the Venezuelans weren't racist against the other Venezuelans, but the communists wanted to seize that property. So I remember when I was in the military, well, a long time ago now, but there used to be a lot of activity around the South African bases and coasts. You guys used to have a fairly blue water navy that was deployable, some good submarines out there. And then I've read a little bit online that it seems that you have a lot more interaction with the Chinese, especially around your military bases and other things. It seems that China is really, I don't know, is there some kind of new connection between South Africa? Is it turning away from like Great Britain and US relationships more toward China?
I think globally you probably see a shift in the global balance of power from west to east. And Africa as a whole, 50 plus countries have certainly experienced that. And my experience of working here is that Chinese diplomats, in terms of their strategic thinking and their long-term vision, are probably performing and display diplomatic capabilities far beyond that of many other countries and societies. I think Chinese have also been very patient in Africa, and they've been able to move into societies and countries at points of weakness as financiers of last resort, and use the debt so incurred to establish a great degree of geostrategic influence on the continent. South Africa's fiscal position has worsened considerably in recent years. Debt levels are escalating. Talk of bailouts is in the air amongst economists. And I think the risk is here that South Africa may begin to look to China as a source of financing, motivated in part by the fiscal crisis, but further motivated by ideological pressures that see Western nations as hostile. Ideological hostility to Western democracies is certainly increasingly present in South Africa's foreign policy. And the risk for South Africa is that in accepting bailouts, for example, from the Chinese, should it come to that, the government surrenders fiscal and therefore policy sovereignty, and South Africa becomes a Chinese lily pad over the longer term, or a Chinese outpost or province, which may mean that a lot of the promise that South Africa had to emerge in to be a case study in the emerging world of a country that was a fundamentally free and open society that was able to use the democratic transition to grow at rates that would see living standards rise and the country over 20 or 30 years become a middle income society. That trajectory may be broken, and South Africa under Chinese influence might become more aligned to what we've recently seen under leaders such as Paul Kagame in Rwanda or Haile Mariam Desalegn in Ethiopia, models that are authoritarian states, but not cruel dictatorships, perhaps guided democracies, where powerful governments use force, conservative economic reforms in the pursuit of higher living standards. And as perhaps we've seen recently in Brazil, the risk is that a population that has gone through an era of economic stagnation or decline will sometimes be very tempted to surrender civil liberties for the promise of stability and prosperity. And the unique thing that South Africa might have brought to Africa and the world is that there is no payoff to be had between civil liberties, political stability, and economic prosperity. The model of a free and open society, real democracy, could deliver real prosperity to its people, a different case study to the very great socioeconomic successes that we saw coming out of the Asian tiger models of development of past decades.
Yeah, that's true. I'm just reading about the Brazilian election, and that is interesting. Actually, it's the security. People will vote. That we have a saying in America that he who surrenders his liberty for his security deserves neither. And so, but that I'm not saying that's what Brazil did, but it seems that the people are very interested. I know that you have to go. The last question I have for you is, I talk to a lot of people online. A lot of people talk to me. They're very concerned about a South African future. It ranges, of course, from apocalyptic, where once again you guys will have blood on the street and civil war and mass, all the way to I don't know, everything. They will seize all the property and nothing will happen and everything will be hunky dory and there's no issue. I believe literally your president said that to my president. Oh no problem here. Everything's going to work out fine. So it goes from here to here, and so people are trying to understand. And then, of course, the Canadians are bringing certain people in, and the Russians are. It's not debated in America because we have our current elections here. So basically, nothing will get done for another 3 months until things get kind of settled out. But in Europe, it's actually debated whether South Africans are deserving of refugee status. So can you please tell us a little bit about what you see 12 to 24 months out of South Africa? Is it closer to the this incredible destruction coming on, or is everything hunky-dory and will work itself out?
We have some problems, undoubtedly, and so much now hinges on the future trajectory of property rights in the country. There is an assault on property rights underway at this time. The South African government likes to make the case that it needs to expropriate property within the country in order to set right the historical injustice of the denial of property rights to Black South Africans. And while that injustice needs to be set right, it doesn't follow that eroding property rights today will make up for the erosion and denial of property rights in previous decades. The most effective means by which to ensure that black South Africans get access to the ownership of property or assets or commercial farms or whatever the case will be, is to ensure that the requisite education reforms are in place. South Africa's schools perform very badly, that we are in a competitive emerging market that can attract vast investment inflows, both foreign and domestic investment, that we are a safe and secure society, and that we are one that values employment creation and entrepreneurship. And if those steps are in place and opportunities are presented to black South Africans, then there's every chance that we may grow over the next decade to resume the living standards and democratic trajectory that we were on a decade ago. But if we lose the fight on property rights now, we lose a great deal more than just access to property, because property rights anchor substantive human liberty in all free and open societies. And losing property rights is the thin end of the wedge on the way to the surrender of civil rights, and ultimately with them the rule of law. And it is the height of political cynicism to use that great historical injustice, which was the denial of property rights to black South Africans, to justify setting in motion today a chain of events that may do very great damage to the democratic transition and successes that we achieved in the 1990s. And my advice to observers from outside will be to watch the property rights battle very closely. If we're able to settle the battle in favor of property rights, to return to the democratic settlement and the constitutional dispensation that was designed here 20 years ago, then in time I have no doubt that the country's potential is such that we may grow into a position where South Africa in 20 or 30 years' time is a middle-income society. But if we lose the battle on property rights, then I don't think South Africa is going to attract the fixed investment that it needs in order to liberate the great majority of South Africans from poverty. And in that case, poverty and desperation will be exploited by populist politicians as a revolutionary asset. And that process will culminate in the severe erosion of the democratic gains that were made here 20 years ago. And should we follow that trajectory, there's absolutely nothing to say that South Africa cannot become the world's next Venezuela.
Yes, we all fear that. I wish that more Americans of African descent would spend more time being focused on South Africa. I covered this once in my blog. There's never been a wealthier group of sub-Saharan Africans in the world than in America, controlling more wealth, more billionaires, more patents, more education, more home ownership. Blacks in America are, we still only 30% exist in the middle class, and it's taken us generations to get there of focusing on education and improving. Yes, we still have obviously a great deal to go, but 30% of the middle class, that's a huge number. And what's unknown is that, the 70% who are not quite in the middle class in America being poor is, 4 children and $40,000 a year. It's not the same. GDP, they said that if the blacks in America formed a separate nation, it's in the top, 50 or 50 nations in the world. It's incredible. Obviously, incredible, the GDP production. And we didn't do that through socialism. We did not do that. In America, we don't even have any type of government program where they have attempted to pay us back for slavery. Those kind of things tend not to work. More opportunity, education, more opportunity for working, and it's not a quick. Almost everything worth building is not fast. It's just that's the way it is. But it works, and we have. No one can deny that we are the wealthiest groups of sub-Saharan Africans to ever exist on the history of mankind, and we did not do that through socialism. Absolutely was not done. And I don't understand how people can look at our example, and you can poke holes at it more, and there's issues, and there's always issues. I'm not saying there aren't, but that statement is true, and not go, well, perhaps we should look at what they did and duplicate it, or see what we can learn from that, and then kind of move forward. I really wish policies that are going to end up getting a lot of people hurt and a lot of people very poor for a very long time. So one of the questions I was supposed to ask you is, what can we do? Like, in America, people who are concerned about South Africans and Africa in general and trying to help. Like I said, working in South Africa was very important for us, and the apartheid regime and caring about people is, what can we do? Do we send you what can Americans do? It's kind of on the other side of the world. I don't really know what, Americans are like, first you have to tell them where South Africa is. It's in Southern Africa, but Americans are a bit inward-looking people, and so is there anything that we can do to help this decision of the property rights go the right way?
There's one thing you can do, which is to use, where you can, your extraordinary global influence to invest in ensuring that South Africa becomes the type of society that Americans would be happy to live in. If that happens, you can be relatively sure that South Africa has succeeded as an experiment as a free and open society and a democracy in the emerging world, and that American interests in Southern Africa will be very much more secure. South Africa's relationship with the United States will be very much more improved. We're not big on the handouts and aid and the special support measures and the like. There's absolutely no reason why South Africa cannot stand on its own 2 feet and fight for its place in the global rankings of nations and in terms of economic prosperity and the like. Treat us fairly, trade with us, and treat us as an equal partner. But where you can exert influence, that influence must be directed at making sure that the systems of government, the rules, the policies, the principles that underpin a future South Africa are the same rules and policies and principles that you would be happy to live under in the United States. And if you do that, and your diplomats and your investment community does that, then you are doing a very important and great thing in helping us secure the success and ensure the success of South Africa's democracy.
Thank you very much for that time, and thank you very much for your time and help. Have a great day.
Thank you. You too.
You too. Have a good one.